Okay, good morning, everybody. This is Terrence Jancy with some comments about the week three essays and a few guidances for the next week's assignment for the international development class. So, I will start with social capital comments. Now, I read all of your essays. Some of them were extremely well written and high quality. Others, my feeling was that this must have been a pretty busy week for many people because for many people it felt like perhaps you were really, maybe there was an ADP directors meeting or some of the reporting was due or there was some issues like that. And so it was hard to focus, I think, on the topic, which is understandable when you're doing this during work. Um, but in general, I thought uh, for some of you, the quality of the writing this week was a little bit more hurried than in previous weeks. But nevertheless, there were some interesting observations and some patterns I saw in many of the writings. One is, and I really want to emphasize this a little bit more. NGOs do not intend to work on social capital, but what they do can have effects on the quality of the social capital in a community. But if an NGO has a positive effect on social capital, it's usually by accident. They don't mean to strengthen social capital. They usually mean to build economic development or to promote women's empowerment. But you don't really set up your system saying, I want to set it up in this way so that social capital is stronger when we leave. It's not what's intended. But there are a lot of things that can help social capital, even if we don't intend it to be for that purpose. So, for example, things like starter groups in the DPA process uh, can be a good place to accidentally strengthen social capital because you're bringing in different groups, there are people who represent different types of stakeholders in a community, and you're bringing them into the same room and you're allowing them to interact with each other. So, in some ways, you're building a bit of a social connection that wasn't there before. So, but if you ask the Global Center people, what is the purpose of the starter groups? They won't say to strengthen social networks and social capital in the community. They'll say the starter groups are a way to assure that our designs have community ownership, which is different from social capital. So it's not something I want to overemphasize, but some of your writing, some of the people's essays made it sound like World Vision is actually trying to improve social capital, which is not necessarily the case. The other observation, I'm going to put these two together here. Just because World Vision tries to promote participation doesn't mean that it's automatically improving social capital in the community. And in the same way, just because World Vision is now talking about partnering, whatever that term happens to mean, in their development approaches, that doesn't mean that the partnering builds social capital. It might, but it depends on who and how participation is happening. If people are coming at World Vision's call to a meeting and then they leave again, and their only interaction is with a World Vision person who is talking up front, that isn't necessarily building any new social networks in the community. So you might say, well, the community participated in my training, but if your training is such that the community people are only interacting with you, it's not automatically increasing social capital. And I think some of you, perhaps because of being in a hurry, tended to make the leap or the assumption that, oh, if we're trying to promote participation, then we are promoting social capital. it depends on what kind of participation. One thing many of you did emphasize was the importance of trust and good relationships. And I thought this was an interesting point of starting. I think when you're saying like, how does World Vision build relationships of trust? Because you can't actually do anything unless there is trust in a relationship. And tying into that, then, was the second point that I thought was really interesting. Many of you mentioned the DFs and the TDFs and the role that they might actually play in strengthening social capital, because they are from the community, they're in the community, and they're engaged with the community. And they're the ones that often build the trust in relationships with World Vision. So I thought this was interesting that many of you commented on that. Again, the thing I will mention I want to reinforce about TDFs and DFs, they're not there in order to build social capital, but their presence can lead to improved social capital. So I mentioned in some of my comments to people that there's always a debate about should World Vision have DFs and TDFs because of salary constraints, because it's a lot of personnel, they're only located in a village. And some of the justifications for the value of DFs is actually in things like improving social capital. But since World Vision doesn't necessarily use that as a framework, it can make it hard to justify DFs and TDFs. But they do play, I think, a very crucial role in being able to build some of these social networks by being present in the communities. So I'm usually a fan, a promoter, a supporter of having DFs and TDFs at the community level. But I know it's a debate about whether there should be, especially in the new partnering approaches that World Vision is using. Two last comments. I think some of you worked in the concepts of bonding and bridging social capital, but I think that for all of the essays, there could have been a little more thinking about what is World Vision's particular value or the thing it can do in terms of bonding and bridging. Some kinds of organizations or groups can play a good role in creating bonding social capital. Other types of groups might play a better role in bridging. And some thinking about World Vision and who it is and how it is. Some of you talked about this, but I think it would have been nice to see a little bit more of that kind of analysis of the bonding and bridging. And the last comment I'll make I'm going to try to keep this video shorter than last week's, was the article describes multiple sources of capital, the community capital. So human capital, natural resource capital, financial capital, cultural capital, and social capital. Many of you spent a lot of time writing about the other forms of capital, but the assignment itself was really to focus on social capital. Now, the community capitals framework is an interesting way of thinking about doing a needs assessment in a community, what kinds of projects, to look at different strengths that a community might have. Maybe a community is strong in financial capital, but weak in social capital. So the capitals framework is useful for community development analysis. But in the course of this particular essay, I was wanting you to focus only on the social capital dimension, although obviously the other forms of capital are very important. Okay, those are mostly my comments, most of my comments or general comments from the essays. Now, the other thing I wanted to do in this quick Skype was, or not Skype, YouTube, was to talk a little bit about your final presentation. and you are working in groups already. So what I would like you to do is select a single World Vision project. So be specific. Some of you have talked about your ADP or talked in general about our transition ADPs, but I want you to pick a specific project in an ADP. It can be a grant funded or a sponsorship project. So I said, for example, children's empowerment project in Darkhan, or the economic development project in Khenti. But whatever one you pick, pick a specific. Be as specific as you can. Um, and then I want you to analyze this project based on the frameworks from the last 3 weeks. So from week 1, I want you to look at the development paradigms. Looking at the way the project is designed, which paradigm do you think it fits? Modernization, growth with equity, liberation from dependency. Which one does the project use as its paradigm? And then I want you to ask or analyze from how is the project being implemented? Is it being implemented in a first generation way? Is the World Vision worker mostly an administrator? Is it a second generation, which is a trainer, etc.? And then the third thing I want you to look at is this idea of social capital. Just look at the social capital. Don't look at the other capitals, but ask um, the way that things are being implemented, the quality of the implementation. What are some of the ways this might be hurting or helping social capital? And then the fourth thing I want you to do is discuss recommendations. So you're looking at the project, it's a very specific project. Pretend you're an evaluator of that project. What recommendations would you give based on the things we've read and discussed in the last 3 weeks about adjustments to the project? It can be in any of these three frameworks. In fact, it would be nice if the recommendations, at least one recommendation, came from each of the frameworks, just to push you to think about that a little bit. The presentation shouldn't be very long. They should be no more, maximum, I'm going to emphasize this, maximum 15 minutes. But if it's less than that, it's okay. Now, don't be so much less that you end up not saying anything, but you also don't have to spend a really long time. The problem is a really long time is that you have to then sit through and watch it. So be efficient and make sure it doesn't go more than 15 minutes in your presentation. Okay, thank you everybody. That is just some summary comments from the readings, from the essays, and thinking about this fourth exercise. As always, please email me if you have any questions or desire for clarifications. And you have my email, but I am writing it here again. All right, thank you everybody. I hope you have a good morning.